Max. We're talking about A La Calle that we're going to be watching on HBO next week. And if this is your first feature film, congratulations. But what a topic that you are diving into for your first film.
Yeah, definitely very hard. Obviously, anytime you take a filmmaker first film, feature film, it's going to be a very difficult task. It's a lot harder to maintain interest for 90 minutes to 2 hours than some of the shorter form stuff I did. But secondly, it's just a really difficult topic to talk about and to get into. Not just the sort of emotional toll that it takes covering something like this, but also just the logistics of trying to record in a country that is unfriendly to press, journalists, anyone with a camera who might be looking at things that they're not supposed to. And so, yeah, it was a really difficult process. But I think, Nelson, who I know wanted to be here, but his internet, but his commitment is more as a Venezuelan, and my commitment, I think, just as someone from Latin America and just a person who cares about human suffering, it was something that it was a challenge that we needed to face, and so we did as best we could. It's a very difficult topic. There's a lot of opinions about what's going on in that country that range from the political socialism versus capitalism, all these different types of things that people talk about. And I think for us, we try to get away from all that, get away from that discussion, that conversation of right, wrong, socialism versus capitalism, and focus on the humanitarian crisis. Of course, we had to discuss the politics. You can't get away from it a little bit, but really it was for us, it was about showing suffering on a scale that is really hard to imagine if you haven't experienced it or seen it firsthand.
And like you say, you weren't picking sides. You were just pretty much telling what it is out there. And you used these personalities. You used Randall Yee. You were just a couple with a kid struggling to get food on the table. You have Nixon, which is one of the leaders of the resistance. You have Federica, who is the medical student, and she goes out to the streets and help people. And you have even Leopoldo López, that was quite a surprise.
Yeah, I think, for us, obviously, like I mentioned, our focus was to demonstrate the issues of what was going on in Venezuela and to find subjects and people who best represented those problems and those issues. You have the medical with Federica, you have sort of the day-to-day struggles of Randall, and then you have the more political / mixed day-to-day kind of with Nixon and Leopoldo. And I think for us, that decision creatively was more around the idea of what people can relate to is other people. And you can give them, and there are moments in our documentary where we show, the GDP and the facts and the sort of large scale things. And those things are interesting, but they kind of just like, what does 3 million refugees look like? It's like a number that most people, you tell them, and it just they don't know how bad it is because it's nothing they can possibly imagine truly. But if you look at a Randall and you see what that suffering is like on an individual level, and then multiply that by millions, I think that's something that's easier to understand and to hit home with the audience. And so that's what we tried to do. We tried to focus in kind of on these individual stories that represented these large issues, and then periodically show the scale when we could.
Now, I understand you guys were not physically there.
No, we were not. It was a decision that we had to make, that Nelson made early with me, and it was basically, there's a few things. If anyone listened to the Spanish version of this interview, they probably heard my accent and my Spanish. And while it's decent and I can understand perfectly, you listen to me talking in the street and you know that I'm not Venezuelan, and you definitely know I'm probably from America. A. B. Nelson, his last name and his family are kind of flagged by the government for previous things that have happened. So basically, we kind of had to make the decision that if we wanted to get the story and we wanted to stay there for years, we weren't the best people to capture it on the ground. the best people to capture it were people who were there, who knew how to move in that environment, who had been there for years, who understood not just how to move around the city and the town, and not only had the right accent, but also who had been living under dictatorship and understood what that meant. You know, I mean, bring someone like me, an American, and throw me into that environment. There are things I take for granted that I'll do something, and next thing you know, Sabine's got me and documentary's over. So Nelson and I tried to employ a team on the ground that we felt knew how to move and could guarantee for the long haul. And you know, definitely that created other issues. It's when you're a director and you're a filmmaker and you're a documentary filmmaker and you're kind of used to being either behind the camera, right next to the camera, then you're having to tell someone over WhatsApp or whatever around the world what you want them to do, and then and because of the internet, the only time we got to see footage was like 3 months later. So they would go shoot for a month or two, and then we would try to find someone to send a hard drive back covertly. We'd get the whole hard drive, which would be like a month or two of footage, review it, and then that's when we were like, oh, we got it, or oh, we didn't quite get it. And it's kind of hard to do that. But I don't think that if we had tried to go ourselves, we would have been able to capture the stories that we did, or stay active for as long as we did. And that's really, you know, and honestly, that's kind of a nice thing in another way, because people, the filmmakers and the creatives that we sort of, I would say, empowered to go out there and find the story, you know, they also were helped us figure out where to go. You know what I mean? Like, who were the interesting people to talk to, where we could find them, what were the issues of the day. You know, they kind of helped us keep an ear to the ground so that we could kind of get a little bit more intimate and stay abreast of what was going on. It's hard, you know, you look on Instagram, on the internet, and do the best you can, but that's not as good as hearing it from the people who are living it every day. And so actually that they ended up proving to be really good resources to help us understand what the situation was as it was unfolding.
So in this case, you're showing the story of the people there.
Yeah.
And regardless of sides politically, there's no excuse for having people starve and limited to resources, going to the grocery store, only seeing a small quantity of things, no options like we have here in the US, nothing compared to it.
Yeah. It's really, I think the most difficult part for me, and going into that, you know, maybe I'm going to answer your question kind of in like a different way than, but you know, it's hard to understand, and I think I was talking about this earlier. It's like it's hard to understand when your money doesn't have value. Like, that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really make sense to people like myself, who've grown up in the States for the most part, spent a little time in Colombia, but they, in my experience, haven't had the same issue. When you go to the grocery store and there just isn't meat that day, it's like, not only does your money have no value, or you need a mountain of it to pay for things, but even if you had that mountain of cash, well, there is nothing for you. So I think that's something that's really hard to understand for people like myself, and who haven't lived it. And it's also, and then in that same way, it's really hard to understand how a government or people who are kind of responsible for the well-being of their people, Maduro and all the people surrounding that, can allow or can live with themselves for allowing something like that to continue to occur, and to exacerbate the issue. You know, don't get me wrong, like, there are certain aspects of it that are a little bit beyond their control, but they are mostly responsible for what's going on, and I think it's really hard to conceive or to understand how someone can be okay with that. It's truly awful. And I think for us, and you know, for Nelson and I, you know, we got so close to all our subjects. You know, that's just what happens when you're interacting with them. over years, you know, because even though we were doing it from afar, we were WhatsApping on the phone, Skype. I mean, all the above, all the time with these people, and eventually did get to meet a lot of them in person. Um, and so you get close to them, and you start to feel that suffering firsthand, and you start to feel a little helpless because you're kind of with them when they're suffering, and you just don't really have a solution for them, really. Like, limited is what you can do, especially as a documentarian, like ethically how you're supposed to act in that situation. And so it was difficult. I think the best thing, you know, we know how to do in our tool is to capture the story and show it to as many people as possible, which is what we're hoping for with this release on HBO Max, and then hopefully further releases down the road will allow it to pressure the governments of the world, like Russia, China, the United States, to take decisive action toward helping alleviate the humanitarian crisis out there. The needle doesn't move until those governments decide, until the world governments decide. You know, we can, you know, I do what I can do as a documentarian to spread the word. Federica does what she can do in the medical front. Randall tries to provide for his family in the best way he knows how. Nixon fights on the street. Leopoldo fights in his own way. Human Rights Watch, all these people fight in the ways they know how. But unless the only way it's really going to stop is by international pressure. And that's, you know, the negotiations going on in Mexico right now. We can only hope that something fruitful comes out of that, because this is, I mean, this is it is one of the worst humanitarian crises the world has known and will know, for at least the future, the short-term future. And I think it's, you know, the fact that it continues to get worse every day is just, it's absurd.
It's very sad. Well, we just hope for change for 2025, that there's a miracle.
Yeah, no, that's what I hope as well. I mean, it would be good not just for Venezuela, but for all of Latin America, who I know has suffering alongside with the Venezuelans through this moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Max, for your time.
Thank you so much.